Hello, what's up peeps, this is Geek Artist back again with another video, and on this week's tutorial I'm going to be showing you how to paint stones, how to paint rocks. So definitely make sure to watch this video till the end so that you fully understand the methods and techniques of painting rocks. And if you haven't watched the previous videos from this series where I show how to paint bushes, shrubs and mountains, definitely check those out. And if you're new to my channel, don't forget to subscribe and click on that bell icon so that you get notified about my upcoming videos. So without further ado, let's do this. Okay, so I'm going to start off with a simple circle with around 1 pixel of feather, and then I'm going to take a new layer and set it to clipping mask, and with a soft round brush set at a low opacity, I'm going to pick a darker shade of the base color. I'm going to paint the shadow, and then I'm going to pick a lighter color, slightly warm, and I'm going to paint the highlights so that finally the circle resembles more of a 3D sphere. So now that you have a basic idea of how to draw a sphere that resembles a 3D shape, let's see how to break it down. So I'm going to break this shape down into smaller shapes using these wavy lines that more or less resembles cracks. So basically, if this was a ball made of rock, I am drawing these smaller cracks and I'm breaking the circle down into smaller shapes. Now notice that I'm not following any pattern. This has to look natural and organic and random. So I'm just randomly drawing these shapes. I'm splitting the circle down into smaller segments, and notice how I'm varying the thickness of the cracks. Not all the cracks are thin or thick. There's a nice variation. Some areas are thicker than the others and some areas are thinner. And also using a smaller brush, I'm painting some thinner cracks. So ultimately we have a nice variation of larger segments, medium-sized segments and smaller size segments. When you're breaking a larger shape down into smaller shape, ensure that you're not keeping larger segments only. The entire thing should not be made of only larger segments or only smaller segments. Make sure to keep a nice variation of small, medium and large shapes. So once I'm happy with the segments, finally I'm going to take a new layer, set it to multiply, and I'm going to paint the shadows. Now notice that I'm painting the shadow in the side of the segment that is away from the lights. Also notice that the segments that are farther away from the light are mostly covered in shadow and receive very little to no highlights at all, and the segments that are very near to the light receive little shadow but mostly highlights. And a great advantage of painting shadows with the multiply blending mode is that you don't have to repeatedly pick colors. It adjusts automatically according to the present tone of the base color. And then I'm going to take a new layer, set it to overlay, and I'm going to paint the highlights. Basically, I'm going to paint the highlights on the areas where I did not paint the shadows. Notice the areas that are closer to the light area receive a lot of highlights. So basically, I'm carving out a more realistic 3D shape out of our circle that we had started off with. Now with another new layer, I'm painting the more finer highlights or specular highlights. I'm also painting highlights along the cracks, the smaller and thinner cracks, only in the side that's facing the light. And now what we're going to do is we're going to paint some texture. What it looks like right now, it can be anything. It can be metal even. So in order to differentiate it from metal, we're going to give it some rough texture to make it look like a rock. We're going to paint some dents, some cracks, some scratches, stuff like that. And we're also going to highlight it, some random dots and strokes here and there. I'm going to paint some scratches near the highlighted areas. So notice I'm drawing the scratches. I'm also painting some smaller cracks even over the highlights. And all of these cracks also get highlights of their own, sort of extensions of the main highlight body. And once I'm happy with the rendering, I'm gonna paint some backlight or rim light or kicker light, whatever you prefer to call it, to make this look more interesting and make it pop out a bit more from the background. I'm using the smudge tool to make the strokes look more even and smooth, and I'm drawing some more cracks even on the backlights. I'm just changing the color a bit and adding a bit of softness to it. So right now what we have, if you look at the inner area of this, it looks like more or less a realistic 3D object or material. But if you look at the outer area of the circle, it is a perfect circle and it cannot be like that. So in order to make it more synchronized with the inner texture that we just painted, I'm gonna erase certain areas of this perfect circle. So the areas where the cracks meet with the outer border of the circle, I'm gonna erase them, and you'll see that automatically the part that was missing in it, the 3D feel that was missing along the outer edges, is automatically gonna come alive. So as you can see, as soon as I erase, as soon as I break the outer silhouette or the shape, it stands out immediately. So I'm color grading it slightly to add some colors to the grayscale feeling so that it resembles a bit more like a rock. What I'm doing now is I'm painting some smaller chunks of rock that are probably falling off of this larger chunk, or maybe they're hovering in space, just to add a bit of a X factor. And all of these individual smaller chunks are going to have lighting of their own and some backlight as well, just like the main chunk. Yeah, I think it looks cool. I'm going to change the color of the background so that the whole thing pops out a bit more. So what it looks like right now basically is it can resemble anything. It can resemble melting iron, it can resemble solidified lava, it can be anything. It's not exactly rock. This is not what a rock usually looks like. This is a very basic material study of complex formations in nature. It's very important to understand how to create or how to paint something like this, how to paint texture and light of a complex or complicated surface like this in order to be able to paint rocks that resemble rocks that we find in nature. And as you can see, I'm painting some mosses on it to give it a more natural feel that, yeah, this is a part of nature and these are natural formations that we get to see mosses building up on rocks. I'm adding some highlight to that as well so that it synchronizes better with the main body. So once you have understood how to render a complicated natural material like this, now I'm gonna show you how to paint an actual rock, something that looks like a rock and not a ball made of a certain material. So I'm going to start off by sketching a simple shape, something like a rhombus, and then I'm going to refine it by adding a bit more detail to make the shape a bit more complex, and then I'm going to add some inner detail to break it down into smaller shapes that can resemble other surfaces. Now in a new layer, I'm trying to define it with a cleaner sketch to get some more well-defined shapes. So once I'm happy with that, I'm going to take a new layer underneath this, and with the help of the lasso tool, I'm going to select the entire shape and I'm going to fill it with a base color. Now I'm going to take new layer and clip it onto the base layer, and then I'm going to select these other surfaces, or the surface that's facing the top, the ones that look kind of flat, and fill that with a color, a light tone. Now let's say light is coming from the left. I'm going to take a new layer, and with the soft round brush set to a larger size and low opacity, I'm going to pick a darker color and I'm going to paint a gradient to give us a hint or an idea of how the light is going to transition from light to dark. And I'm going to do the same to the other surface. And once I'm happy with that, I'm going to take a new layer and I'm going to pick tones from that very gradient that we have, and I'm going to try to carve out finer shapes. I'm going to draw some nice hard edges so that this looks more like a solid rock, something that carries a weight and not a chunk of cotton or cloud. It's going to have hard edges and soft edges. So basically that's how I'm carving out a solid shape. And I'm making these decisions of where these shadow areas are going to start. Is that if you notice the top surface, it has a distinct shape, and the shape that is pointing towards the light direction are going to be in the highlight area, and the other side of it facing away from the light are going to receive the shadow. So you can see the third top surface, or the smallest surface that we have on the right side, is receiving a lot less light compared to the two bigger surfaces. That's because it's more or less on the side that's not receiving any light because it's under the shadow of the larger chunk. And now some highlights on the top surface. And finally, I'm going to take a new layer and add an overall darkness to it with a multiply blending mode to create some contrast. Now here's the fun part. Till now we were playing by the rules, and this is where we break the rules and we go crazy. So I'm going to be breaking all of this down into smaller shapes and all sorts of crazy cracks and whatnot. So as you can see, I'm breaking the shapes to create some smaller surfaces, some cracks and some dents to show that this is a rock with textures and uneven edges. Some of the areas are going to be much deeper and darker. And finally, I'm painting the cracks, and make sure to vary the thickness of the cracks. Some places are going to be thin and some places are going to be thick. That's how you make them look more natural. Do not just draw plain thin lines. Even thin lines, they're just not going to look that great. Now it's time for the brighter highlights. I'm going to pick a bright color, a lighter color. I'm going to paint some highlights along the edge of the top surface and also along the cracks. Some more breaks in the shape, some more cracks and dents, scratches here and there, and also highlights along these formations facing the direction of the light. I'm making the background color a little lighter so that the overall rock pops out a bit more. And finally, I'm adding some contrast to it with some darker shade to create a better contrast in the shadow areas, and some cracks into dark areas to break the pattern, and then some brighter highlights. I'm going to duplicate this and merge them all together and then vary the color a little bit. So yeah, there we have our rock. And if you want to make it look more natural, you can always go ahead and paint some mosses to make it look like a more natural formation, or you can just leave it be. So what we have now is more like it's something you can use in a 2D animation background or for 2D video game assets. But then again, it's following the same principles that I showed in the first material ball painting. So I hope you got to learn a thing or two from that. And now here's a time lapse of me painting another rock. This time it's a more realistic approach, but the basic technique and method is exactly the same as the previous rock and the first material study that I did. And it's a bit more realistic, more natural looking rock that you can find around you. So I hope after watching this video you're going to find it easier to paint rocks and stones, and I hope you found this video useful. So make sure to subscribe and click on that bell icon if you enjoy my videos, and look forward to my future uploads. So that's it for now. See you on the next one. Peace.